Hi everybody and welcome to Dublin Tech Talks. On this show we have Sandra Healy. Welcome Sandra, who is CEO and founder of Inclusio, recently closing a 6 million Series A funding, which is brilliant. Congratulations. Amazing. So it's a platform that allows organisations to understand people, build their workplace cultures where everybody feels valued, respected and recognised. Sandra, welcome.
Thank you. Delighted to be here.
Back.
Yeah.
Sorry, welcome back.
Welcome back.
You had a virtual chat with David before.
That's right, yeah.
So a lot has changed in the last 2 years. Do you want to give us a brief outline of what Inclusio is and does for organisations?
Yeah, I might just take a minute just to start at the beginning around where the idea came from and bring you up to today. So I suppose a lot of people that have heard me talking before would know that I spent 20 years working in the global telecoms industry, and I've been involved in diversity and inclusion for about 17 years. And what I realised when I was in industry is that I had really clear KPIs on one side of the work I was doing around sales and customer delivery and customer experience. But when I came to the work I was doing, the very meaningful work I was doing in diversity and inclusion, I had no way to evidence the impact of my work to the business. And at the time I was studying my master's in organisational psychology in DCU. I was learning all around the science, around how do you measure and understand culture and people in work. And that got me thinking that there has to be a way to combine the technology and the science together to bring a scientific evidence-based approach to measuring culture, diversity and inclusion. That was back in 2016. Myself and 10 slides made the brave move of coming out of industry, and I actually spun the idea into DCU, and we secured Enterprise Ireland commercialisation funding, and over 4 years in research and development then we built, research, design, built and spun out the platform. So essentially what it is, we collect over 100 demographic data points, allowing people to confidentially be counted in work. We've developed a scientific model that measures culture and inclusion in work. And it allows people to give, again, confidentially give their feedback around their experience in their teams, but also their connection to the organisation. And we look at things like psychological safety, trust, belonging, job supports and things like that. And then the third element of it is learning. So help people understand what it's like for people who are different from themselves. Yeah. And it's all based on behavioural science nudge. So it's, short interactions. And essentially what we do is we help shift people's thinking and help them build empathy and understanding for others.
And is it focused on enterprise clients, or is it kind of what works best for the platform? Is it 0 to 100? It has to be a certain amount?
Yeah, like the bigger the population, the more granular the data. So we protect people's identity. Obviously, that's the beauty of what we do. We are the voice of your people, and what we do is we aggregate their data and bring it into analytics dashboards. And then the organisations, like our customers, generally they're global organisations, 500 and above. Although we do have companies that are smaller than that, and essentially they use our data then for their annual reports, their ESG reporting, gender pay gap. Some of our customers now are using our insights to write their gender pay gap reports. And essentially it helps the organisation identify their strengths and weaknesses around the culture. Where are we doing really well? Where do we have gaps? And what are we going to focus our efforts on now for the next 1 to 2 years to kind of really start to shift things in the right direction?
Yeah, I love the kind of the anonymity of it. I think that's like looking at the product and seeing the kind of yesterday having a look through it. Yeah, that kind of blind data is really important, especially for employees that may feel those surveys that come out are, clearly you can trace back the IP, or you there's always that doubt about it.
Are you less than 1 year in the company?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting.
Where do you sit?
Yeah. It's interesting when we researched before we wrote one line of code, and when we spoke to organisations, we spoke to 35 global organisations. We said, "What's the problem? What are you finding?" And the first thing they told us is we really struggle to collect the diversity data. We want to be reflective of the customers and the communities we serve, but we don't know who we have in the organisation. And when we spoke to the employees, they said we don't trust the internal systems. We don't trust the engagement surveys and things like that. And we want to be heard, and we don't like disclosing personal things about ourselves and having that attached to our records.
I was just going to say that, is that people don't want to be categorized, either. Like, so is it like a mix? When you were thinking about how this might all work, was a mix of that anonymous component is important, but then also like gamified, not to trivialize it, but engaging in terms of how we nudge people along that journey and keep them coming back to the.
We set out to solve the challenges for both the employees and the organisation, and so the nudge element and the short interactions piece was time and cost efficiency from the organisation perspective, but also the gamified piece then is that the employee is getting something at the same time as they're giving back. So they have the opportunity to be counted, have a voice, and also learn. So there, there's articles, videos, personal stories and things, but short interactions. So they get something back every time they go in. And from an organisational perspective, it means they get what they need to be able to shift things in the right direction. So that we set out to deliberately build something. It was interesting. One of our, and they're still our customer here in Ireland, Sodexo, they came to us with the challenge of distributed workers, so their model is people come in and then they're distributed in other sites. And that was a big influence for us around how do you know what's happening around the edge? If people are in different locations, how do you get a sense of the culture? And interestingly, then we spun out into COVID and here we have, everybody has a hybrid distributed workforce. So that was just good timing, I think, on our part that we help. So that's part of our data. It doesn't matter where your people are. We're able to give you that sense check around, what's working and what's not from a cultural perspective.
Any surprising results for anything that you've come through? Is there, that you kind of went, I wasn't expecting that? Or,
I think we do a lot of work. We're starting to do more work with sectors now, which is much more meaningful. So we do global benchmarks through the platform. But I think where it's really insightful is when you start getting down to sector benchmarks. So we're working with the insurance sector in Ireland and the UK and soon to be in other markets as well, at creating sector benchmarks. But when we look at the data, one of the surprises for us is we're working on a project with Stanford University and Ulster University around neurodiversity and what's the experience like for neurodiverse individuals in work. And what we have found, when all things are equal, there's slightly lower levels of belonging, which is very interesting, right? Because that's never come out in any research before. And Professor Lawrence Fung in Stanford, his area of expertise is working around neurodivergent individuals in work, and that's his centre of excellence there. So we're going to publish papers on the back of that. And what we can do is bring the insights from that back into the platform to help managers be more equipped around getting the best out of your people. And it's very much focused on a strengths-based, how do I get the best out of people? What do I need to do as a leader to make sure that I'm doing the best for my team? That's what we describe ourselves as a social impact business, right? We set out to be the voices of people in work, and for me, that kind of cycle of bringing insight back in through the platform to make the workplace better is really, really important.
And you mentioned the pandemic. Clearly, it was a catalyst for a lot of change. That employee-employer dynamic shifted. People's expectations of what the world of work would look like changed. And then, companies were very focused on trying to keep people engaged, keep a semblance of productivity and, all the business reasons why they would all of a sudden put a lot of attention and focus and investment into areas like this.
Yeah.
How have you any view on what the future looks like as we move into a more cost containment and financially challenging phase? Are people starting to row back from that? Or, because the employee experience and expectations haven't changed.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I remember it was actually this time last year. Every year I kind of look at what's the research out there and what's the predictions when it comes to people in work. And this time last year, all the predictions were the 2022 was the year of the employee. And what you saw last, at the beginning of last year and the back end of coming out of COVID, I think there was a lot of kind of protests and where you saw employees coming together and withholding their labour to force their employer to behave in a certain way. And I think that was the prediction then that 2022 would become this, the year when employees kind of really mobilised and enforced that. And in my personal view, I haven't seen it in any research yet, is that I think what's happening in the tech industry now and is probably shaking that a little bit, you know. Like there was a huge drive of hiring in tech, and a lot of the companies now are saying, look, you know, we probably wasn't the right business model for us and we're having to scale back. I think that's going to kind of unseat things a little, right? So it was inevitable. I think it had to happen. It's an interesting question you ask. We did a launch actually yesterday with Grant Thornton, and we had a panel. We had Margot Slattery and some of our customers from Linesight on a panel, and that question, that's what we were asking. What are we seeing changing in diversity and inclusion? And what we're starting to see is a lot of those companies now where they had hired senior D&I people, they're letting them go.
Okay, interesting.
So that's interesting. So that's a sector that we're starting to see a change. What impact will that have? I see that as an opportunity for Inclusio, right? Because what we bring is, in a very efficient way, the data that you need to know what do we need to focus our efforts on. Okay, so whether that's led by your senior diversity and inclusion person, or it's driven by the senior team, or it's driven by your employee resource groups, we get you the insight that you need to make the right decisions around what do we focus our efforts on.
Just on that, I was actually reading an article, I just posted it about the tech sector. It nearly seems like the layoffs are them trying to reinforce their power away from employees, that, hey, you guys thought you were so important, we can actually cut you so quickly, and you need to want to work with us again, rather than feel that you're, you know, that kind of pull and push type mentality. And there's something behind it. I see, like, the salaries were just going up and up and up, and suddenly, you know, you tell that sector you're not as important as you once thought. People go, oh, wait there, I better. Very cynical view of the world. Yeah, some of them have very strong balance sheets, and you look at it and go, there's no real reason to cut 10% of your workforce unless you want to just cut costs.
Yeah, I think it's capitalism in action, though, isn't it? It's, you know, when you get to a certain level of profitability, there's an expectation that that's what you're going to produce for your shareholders. And I think, I suppose if we were having this conversation 6 months ago, I might have kind of probably thought, yeah, I can see that. But I think as I've seen the whole sector now, it's starting to move down into the smaller companies. It's starting to, I think economically, there's a lot of uncertainty around there, and there's a lot of different factors outside employers' control that have created that environment. And you know, I think you have to be conservative at the moment, you know, around the survival of your business. So I think there's a balance. It's not the same for all of them. So I agree, we're not going into individual cases. Yeah. But I do think there has had to be a reset in that sector. And no doubt, okay, it will grow again. There'll be new innovation. They'll be higher back again. But I just think it'll probably be in a more sustainable way when it does come back.
But that uncertainty is a key kind of influencer for the data that you will then see around belonging, you know, people's security, psychological safety, all of that. So, I mean, you know, it's the people who are left behind and unaffected by a redundancy process are still very much affected by that process, right?
Absolutely. And like when I was in tech, I've been in companies that were taken over and downsized. And so I'm 20 years, you can be sure I've gone through what's happening now in the sector. And that's a great point to make. You know, the people who are left behind, you know, how do you stabilize them? How do you know if things are not where they need to be? Psychological safety, really, really important aspect for innovation, and people feeling like that they're valued and that they have a voice in the company. So I think in some ways I admire some of the companies that how they're going about things. They're being very transparent and they're doing it quickly. And what they need to do then after that then is just focus on connecting your people back into the mission of the business, and just trust that you get the head down, you build a sustainable organisation, and you'll grow again. But absolutely, you need to stay very close to your people while that's happening, because what you don't want is to lose the talent that you've kept in the business.
But it's funny, the hiring over the last 2 years, a lot of people felt, irrespective of what company, they had that kind of bottom layer of the Maslow triangle sorted, and it was just about the other things, where now it's coming back to that, your first layer, very important, is, you know, you need to make sure that people feel safe within their organisation to start prospering again, where people were just going, I'll move to the next company, I'll get a bit of a pay rise. I'll move to the next company, I'll get a bit of a pay rise. And that's what was kind of happening.
Yeah. No, and I think, again, a really great point. And certainly, over the last 2 years, we've been trying to hire in the, in startup sector. Yeah. It's been very difficult to compete for talent. And certainly on the tech side of things, it's been very difficult. And not just me, like my network of entrepreneurs have really struggled. So I'm hoping that this creates more of an opportunity for those people to maybe join startups and help grow the next big companies that are listing and more unicorns coming out.
Yeah, 100%.
Because we have really struggled to find local tech in particular, not just us, but I mean in that community. Like we're over in Dogpatch Labs. I think there's nearly 200 companies in there. It's so. Hopefully, what we will see is some people who've been impacted, by the layoffs will consider coming into the startup community.
Yeah.
I'd love that. That would be absolutely fantastic.
I remember we spoke before. I think to separate you, separate from Inclusio the business, but you as an entrepreneur and an early stage company founder. Remember you talked before about being really intentional about the hiring, getting out into communities, where female engineering talent were, for example, and, and aggressively, in the nicest possible way, targeting people and getting them, on board.
Yeah.
Like, should you be, with all the, on the far side of that journey, with all the data you have about why it's important to have diverse teams, like as a founder, should you be thinking from day one about diversity across your business?
Absolutely, because it's easier to do it when there's only 3 or 4 of you. And if you do it intentionally, like if I look at our stats, we just went through an audit with one of our investors now, an ESG audit, and just looking, I think we've like 18, 19 different nationalities. We're I think 60-40 on the gender balance piece. We've no gender pay gap. Now, some of those things are very deliberate and some of them are just by design, right? We're a diversity and inclusion company. We're social impact. We're going to attract people that are committed to our mission. But absolutely, all of us in the company, when it comes to hiring, like I know that, I'm a white Irish person, where am I going to get the best innovation? Sitting in a room with 10 people who are all from different parts of the world and different perspectives and different ages and different backgrounds, or 10 white Irish people the same as me. Yeah. Like it just makes sense, right? And innovation in our platform, we have to innovate, we have to keep it fresh and alive so that people enjoy using it. And where's that going to come from? That has to come from the perspectives. So everyone in our company inputs, where we don't have siloed areas. Everyone inputs into the innovation, and the community in Dogpatch, in fairness, is brilliant for that. Brilliant. It allows us to do that. So it is a critical part of our business. So to your question, should you be doing it from the beginning? Absolutely. And
then what about a company who is just, not through negligence, but just hasn't, it hasn't been, it hasn't worked out, right? And they're a little further along.
Yeah.
Do you find with the customers who come to you and are engaging for the first time, is that first step the hardest? Like kind of just admitting, look, we are where we are. Let's just level set, get some data and start to move forward. Is that sometimes the most difficult decision for companies who maybe aren't where they want to be?
Yeah, I think most companies at this stage, particularly in the size of the organisations we're working with, their biggest challenge is getting beyond gender. Yeah. So most of them have made really good strides and intentional action around gender, but the challenge then becomes how do I get beyond gender, because now you're into protected characteristic data, now you're into the tricky side of things, and you have to do that in a very transparent and intentional, use that word again, way, or your employees are just not going to stick with you on it, right? Yeah. So, and that's where we come in. So it's interesting, like we do a lot of work with the construction sector, which is, who thought, right? Yeah. We never thought that we would, be successful in the construction sector, but that's exactly the challenge they have, is how do I get beyond gender? And actually one of our clients said that we have advanced their diversity and inclusion by 3 years.
Wow.
Because we got them what they needed to build their people plan, to build their diversity and inclusion strategy, to get the board bought in. That's a big thing, right? How do I have the the information and the data I need that's linked to my business KPIs that shows that this is what we need to be focusing our efforts on. So getting started, we're fantastic for that, right? You're not trying to unpick anything. It's very clean. You have the Inclusio data. You can build your strategies, your policies and practices around the data that we produce for you.
Good.
Wow. And a bit I like as well, entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
How are you enjoying it? It's what, come 20 years on and then coming into a product that clearly you love and have passion for.
Yeah.
What is it? What you expected on the journey, or has it been a lot harder?
That's a question. Depends on what day you ask me, I'd say. I think I'd never heard this word before. Actually, I went into DCU, which is entrepreneurship. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. I certainly hadn't, but it did apply to me. I think every company I've ever worked in, when I went in there, I was always taking things apart and putting them back together, or creating new revenue lines and things like that. So absolutely, and entrepreneurship is in my family as well. So it's obviously in the blood. I think for me, combining my passion with the technology and entrepreneurship, like that's absolute magic when you put all of that together. Would I be putting this amount of effort into something maybe that I wasn't as passionate about? Probably not.
Yeah, for sure.
Certainly not at this stage in my life when I should be slowing things down, right? But look, I'm 100% committed to the opportunity we have to make the world a better place. For me, that's really, really important. And I think that gives me a lot of energy and keeps me going. But it's a tough road, I have to say. Not for the faint-hearted, I would say.
And when did you have that aha moment when you went, great, we have a product here, this is something that actually works? And a lot of research came behind it, so there was a lot of development to get to the point. When did you go, oh, thank God, we're here, it's actually working, and the MVP is yes?
I have many of those moments, right? Because the platform is still in my head, right? We're only at kind of 10% of what I know it's capable of doing, right? So for me, I have lots of those moments of when I see something comes out of my head, goes into the design team, there's a Figma made, and all of a sudden now, and then we've a prototype and now it's working. But I think for me, the very first customer we had on the platform, so we spun out of DCU in December, the 1st of December 2020. Right, straight into COVID, and we had to bootstrap. Right, we had to figure out the
plans were out the window.
We had to figure out how do we keep this going. And our first customer, and I'm sure they wouldn't mind me saying, was AMCK Aviation, so an aviation company that had just gone through a takeover, and they used our data to help them bring the culture back together, to help the leadership team guide them on what is it, what do we need to do, and to create this single culture and get the business moving and keeping people productive. Like, we worked with them for a year with the managers and the leadership team, and helped the HR lead, who's now working for us, helped her build a people strategy, and like, that for me was the magic, right? Because that was the first. It was a live customer. Thankfully, everything went perfect. But to see the output and to see how the data can be used in a company for me was absolute magic. And I see that over and over again. We have customers now, we're into 2 years, are re-signing with us. Like that for me, that's another testament to, what, we're on the right track, we're doing the right thing here.
And I'm guessing with anything, the evolution of the data set and track is really the gold part for companies. So it isn't like 1 year journey, it's not a 2 year journey, it's a continuous journey.
You don't fix your culture in a year, I'm sure. And I think any employer will know that, it's never ending. And every time you hire in another group of people everything shifts again, right? So it's an ongoing thing. It's around, the question is, am I focused on the right things that are going to have the right level of impact for the people in the organisation? And that's an important part, part of what we bring is, what do I need to focus on? You can't do everything. You can't do that, right? But at least if you're using the voices of your people to make the decisions around what's important to them, and then you're very transparent around that. You're showing them the analytics. You're bringing that back and saying, look, we asked you, this is what you told us. So this is what we're going to focus our efforts on. I think we're doing a lot of work, I mentioned, with insurance, and we've created, working with CIRDAS, I don't know if you've heard of that, the Centre for Insurance Risk and Data Analytics in the Southeast Technology University. And over the next 2 years, we're a year into it now, we're working with the sector, and it's called Voices. So valuing openness, inclusive culture and equity in insurance. And for me, I love that, right? You're taking a sector and it's about the voices of the people in the sector, right? So I know we're working with the employers, right? They're our customers, but our customers are the employees who work in that sector. So what we're doing is, as we roll out into each company, combining those voices into sector benchmarks. For me, that's very powerful, right? Because now what you have is the collective of the people working in a sector helping to identify and guide the employers around what's important to them. That's very powerful.
Yeah, it is. And it's listening to you, the product, you can clearly see where, why somebody would invest in the business and, in a very tough investment 6 months. So it was brilliant to see.
You mentioned those distributed workforces, and that's the thing, isn't it? It's like to have a mechanism to get, to understand it's not one size fits all approach. Like you may need to have a tailored approach for people, as you said, on the edge who have a different experience because of the way their ways of working are set up. So it's quite a nuanced thing, can only be solved with clear data.
I think, when I talk about culture, I say it lives within the collective behaviour of everyone in the organisation, right? So that's it. That's the way we do things around here. That's what culture is, essentially. Yeah. And then when you think about your people managers, they are the custodians of your culture. And what you're trying to do is create a consistent experience, no matter who you work for. And unfortunately, that's not what happens, right? So it really should be, no matter who I am, no matter what my difference, that no matter what part of the business I'm working in, I get access to the same opportunities. Things are equitable. It's based on getting the best out of me, and it's based on me being highly productive for the organisation. Now, we all know that's the utopia, right? That's not the reality on the day to day. But if there's anything we can do to help start to shift things in the right direction, like quite often what we do is we follow up, we go in on the back of Inclusio. We have a people science team that are experts in organisational psychology and diversity and inclusion. So they'll follow in and row in after and maybe do things like inclusive leadership development, building trust and psychological safety in your teams and that kind of thing. So we help the company fill in the gaps as well. But that's what we're trying to get to, is that consistent experience, no matter where you work in the organisation.
Brilliant. It's you can see, as I said, why it's so successful, and hope it continues and the product thrives. So congratulations.
Yeah, it's been great to follow your story. So best of luck, continued success.
Yep. Sandra Healy,
thank you.
CEO, co-founder Inclusio. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you, Sandra.
Bye.
Thanks.
And that was Sandra Healy, CEO and founder of Inclusio, very interesting Irish business that has come from a passion project of Sandra's. As you can, what I got from the conversation there was she was, it's really passionate for what she's trying to do, and she's very engaged in it. But the product itself is super interesting. That engagement of the employee, ensuring that people feel valued, respected, and recognised within an organisation. If you're an organisation that is trying to retain staff or even trying to attract staff, I think that's a super important area to be in. If you did find that interesting, please subscribe to our YouTube channel or to our Spotify or Apple podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. We'll talk to you soon. Thanks.